All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Dynamics Procure to Pay session. My name is Annette Brewer, and I'm a program manager working on the financials area for Dynamics AX. I am located based out of the Fargo, North Dakota office, and it's truly a pleasure to be here with you today to share these features. So my goal today is to talk about the Procure to Pay enhancements that we've made in AX 2012. And of course, since it's been out for a couple of years now, we've obviously made improvements to it. And I wanted to share customer stories, what they like, little tips and tricks that I've gained from customers as well as I go through the demonstrations. I'd like to get to know the audience just a bit. If you are on our latest version of Dynamics AX 2012, could I have you raise your hands? Okay, a good number. How about 2009? Oh, good. We have a lot of those friends as well. How about anyone on a version before 2009? Welcome. Good for you. Anyone in here that's a prospect or a partner? Okay, good. That gives me some good data to help frame these demonstrations a bit. And because we have a lot of 2009 customers in here, I'll try to be sensitive of that and really point out if there's terminology differences and the differences in functionality and how that compares to what you have today. Of course, I have to flash the disclaimer. I will be showing some of R3. In fact, I am running on the pre-release of R3. And during the demonstrations, I'm going to wear the hats of multiple roles or personas. And if you've attended some of the financial sessions already, you've heard about personas, but if you haven't, a persona is simply a fictitious character that represents real people in the business world that we've interviewed throughout the years. We have two personas in particular that I will be focusing on. We have Alicia, who is our buyer or our purchasing agent. So she's kind of on the operations side of our business. And Alicia is the one that interacts with the vendors many times a day, and she's entering those purchase orders. And as such, speed and accuracy are really key to her role. We also have our accounts payable clerk, who is April, is who we refer to that name. April comes in different, I guess I'll call it flavors. We see multiple Aprils within businesses. We see April, who is responsible for invoicing, so we see the April invoicing clerk. Since she handles all of the vendor invoices and records those, she's often that first person that will notice matching discrepancies. And she works with Alicia over in purchasing and also oftentimes with the general ledger, the accounting manager, or in fact April's manager to resolve those differences. We also see a second type of April. Because of the segregation of duty, there's usually another set of Aprils that deal with the payments. So when we refer to April, we may be referring to the payment clerk as well. And then finally, under the umbrella of April, oftentimes we see an accounts payable manager, especially in the larger processing centers. So sometimes we refer to that as April as well. I'll be covering really all three of those Aprils in our session. In the center panel there, you can see the listing of our demonstrations, and I'm going to spend the rest of our time demonstrating. I'll start out with the purchase order, and we'll see some enhancements there, and then we'll move into the product receipt and look at a couple, maybe three enhancements in that area. We'll spend quite a bit of time on the vendor invoice. That was an area of focus for us in 2012 and continues to be. Specifically there, a couple of the larger things that we'll look at are the invoice matching or three-way matching capability that we have, as well as the vendor invoice workflow. And then I'm really happy to be able to show you a new feature in terms of the pay. We'll go through the setup and the execution of our positive pay. Positive pay is a new feature that we added to release 2, cumulative update 6, I believe it was. All right, so to kind of frame our demos, I always like to have a little bit of a scenario or a story going on, and I figured since we had just turned the page of the calendar to March, coming from Fargo, North Dakota, we have lots of snow, and I think of spring. but I know a lot of people think March Madness, especially for you sports enthusiasts. And if you aren't familiar with March Madness, it's simply the collegiate men's and women's basketball games. So I'm going to pretend that I work for a sporting apparel store, and based on last year's sales, I need to order 1,000 sweatshirts. So I'm going to go over here and start the demonstrations. And one thing to note too about this March Madness campaign that my company is running, I want every time something is sold or purchased under the guise of this March Madness, I want to split that. So I want to split my costs across 2 of my departments or cost centers. So I have prepared a purchase order here. We'll go under the purchase order list page, and it's purchase order 29. And you can see that there is a line there for 1,000 sweatshirts at a unit price of $20.90. That's the easy part, of course, for Alicia. As I mentioned, she enters orders all day sitting in the operations side of the business. What we've seen is that the accounting part of it, the finance part of it, sometimes presents some difficulties because, of course, if Alicia makes a mistake on that purchase order in terms of the accounting, if she doesn't split the distributions or doesn't have something set up right on this purchase order, it flows into the product receipt. And for those of you on 2009, I should pause here. When I use the term product receipt, that is the equivalent of the packing slip. Just a terminology change. In 2012, we refer to it as a product receipt. And also, if she makes a mistake, obviously, it flows down to the invoice. And worst case, it flows down to GL, and then you need to make correcting entries. So we want to make sure that the accounting is correct. And one of the things that we added to 2012 is a financial dimension template. That is the mechanism that I'll use to handle that split, that 40-60 split between the distributions there. So let me just show you the header of the purchase order. And again, for those of you on 2009, I know this user interface looks quite different to you. I'll just pause again for a second and say a lot of our entry forms have a header and a line. Line is usually the default view. You know, it's one form just with 2 views. We've kind of hidden a lot of the fields that you don't have to commonly change into the area called the header. So right now I've flipped over to the header, and I'll go into edit mode here. And here where I'm pointing is the template ID. I set up a March Madness template, so let's go take a look at how I did that. That's actually set up in General Ledger, so this isn't something that Alicia would set up. Typically, this will be set up one time by your accounting manager. So I created this March Madness template, and the template is comprised really of 3 things. You have your ID, and then in the middle of the form, you have the split, and that's where I have my 60% and my 40%. And what I've done right now, on the other side of the screen, you can see the 60% is going to my sales and marketing department. And then I have 40% going to my operations. Now that template comes into play then on these other source documents. So let's go back to my purchase order. And it serves as a default down to my line items to comprise my accounting distributions. So let me go into this form under Financials, Distribute Amounts. And this is another thing that is new in 2012. For those of you on 2009, you do not have the ability to see the accounting or split the distributions in this form, so this is brand new to you. What you have on the left side is a tree view. That will show you all of the line items that are contained on your source document. And if I had sales tax and miscellaneous charges on this line, those would kind of be children of the parent line there. And you would see this fill out as I start adding items to this area. The bulk of the form is where you distribute the amounts of the line. And accounting distributions are not the balanced entry, so it's not both the debit and the credit. In our case, because we're on the purchasing side, It's just going to be your expense or your item side. It's the debit side that you're actually splitting, because when you're on the purchasing side, that's typically what you're splitting out, are your expenses. We do have accounting distributions on the sales side, on the free text invoice. On that side, you're splitting typically your revenue or your sales amounts. But here, for our purposes, I am splitting out my expense here. And my dimension template came into play because it has automatically applied that and split it 40 and 60%. And let me just get the fly out here. You can see that my department has filled in with that operations for the first line, and then the second line, it filled in with my sales and marketing. The form has a lot of functionality. You can split these lines further. So let's say, for whatever reason, let's say I wanted to split this to a different department, maybe 10% to some other department. I'll just go in here and select a different one. We'll select our legal, even though that's not really applicable to my demonstration. And then I can change the second one to 30%. You can see as I change the percentages, the amounts automatically change. So it's very easy to split. You can distribute by percent, amount, or quantity. There's a nice little function here to distribute equally. That will just distribute the 33% for me. And if you do make a mistake and you want to get back to your defaults, there is a nice reset capability here. And I'll just go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and close this, and I'm going to confirm this purchase order at this point. For those of you on 2009, the confirmation process is something that is probably foreign to you. That's simply the equivalent of printing out your purchase order. You're just communicating that to the vendor, whatever way that you happen to be communicating it. It just means I'm done with this particular purchase order. So let's say 2 seconds after I confirm it, my sales manager calls me up and says, hey, our hometown just made the Sweet 16, so we need to up that order. Instead of 1,000 sweatshirts, let's bump it up to 2,000. I say, well, great, I just entered this in, but sure, I can do that. So let's do that. I'll go ahead and change the quantity from 1,000 to 2,000. I'll want to send that back to my vendor so that they're aware of that change, so I'll go ahead and confirm that. And playing out the example just a little bit more, let's say the day has gone by, it's the end of the day, my vendor calls me up and they say, what is going on here? I have 2 of the same purchase orders from you with 2 quantities on. What do you want from me? And obviously, I know that Alicia's are very busy, as I had mentioned, and I've entered a lot of orders. I don't even remember that order, quite honestly, from my first order of the morning. But 2012 has a great feature for me. We keep versions of each of those confirmations. So it's really easy for me to go in and look at that. That's under the Manage tab. I'm going to select View Purchase Order Version. And you'll note that there's a Compare button. So I'll go into that. And I'll focus on my sweatshirt. And there's a great interface here. You can see the old value versus the new value right side by side. So as I'm on the phone with the vendor, I can just easily say, oh, yes, I remember this. It is for the 2,000 sweatshirts. So handy functionality there. I'll go ahead and close out of this, and continuing on, let's assume that my vendor has shipped me half of the goods. They're still a little confused. So they've sent me half the goods. So I'm going to just enter in a product receipt number. And we'll go ahead and post that. And one thing I should mention, that just as you had in 2009, you do have the option to update general ledger at the time that you post the product receipt. That is an option that you can enable. If you do that, it will update the accrued accounts. And you may have heard in other sessions that we have something that was called dual voucher. That is new with release 3 coming out soon. you will see fewer accounting entries. So for those of you that are on 2012, we were posting to some clearing accounts, some holding accounts. You'll see those suppressed, so there won't be quite as much. There won't be 2 vouchers. There will only be 1 at the time of posting those. And I just made a mistake. Did anyone see what I did? I received the whole thing. Does that ever happen in your organizations? Anyone make mistakes? Because I certainly do. We have a feature for that. This has become an area that is much more forgiving in 2012 because we now have product receipt corrections and cancellations. Let me go in here and I'll show you how easy that is to use. You can simply go into the product receipt journal and we have a new correct and a cancel function. So let me open up the correct for you. And it will bring up a form that's very familiar. It looks just like the journal that we were in. It shows me what I posted, and I can go ahead and change this from 1,000 to from 2,000 to 1,000, and you'll notice it calculates the quantity that it's going to reverse for me. This is fully integrated with general ledger as well as inventory. So when I click OK here, it will correct all of that information for me. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look at the history on this too, because this is a really nice traceability feature. What I essentially have are 2 versions, again, of this product receipt. So we do store each version of the corrections or the cancellations, and from those you can go and look at the impact to general ledger and see all of that information. Let me just go ahead and I'll select these 2 and we'll list compare versions. And once again, very nice user interface where you can see side by side exactly what I did here of changing the old value of 2,000 to new value of 1,000. So good traceability there. And I'll close this out. I'd mentioned there is a cancel functionality as well. That may be even more popular, I think, than the correction, because the scenario that I hear most often from people is perhaps they selected the wrong purchase order or did something completely wrong with that posting, and it's very easy, as I showed you, to just click that OK. Cancel does a reversal of the entire quantity, and again, the principles of the traceability in general ledger and inventory are the same, so I won't repeat that, but I'll just show you canceling just as easy as a click of a button, and it gives you a confirmation here. All right, I'll go ahead and close that. And that kind of concludes that first part where we're working in operations. If I review what we looked at on the purchase order, we looked at the dimension template and the accounting distributions there. The whole thought behind that in 2012 was really to free up Alicia from making financial mistakes that could play downstream. I didn't mention, and I should have mentioned at the time I was looking at those purchase order accounting distributions, it is a securable form. So I have had customers tell me, you know, I'm not comfortable giving my buyer free rein out in the distributions at the financial area. You don't have to allow that. If you're not comfortable with that, you can secure that away. Just remember there are tools like the dimension template that you can set up for that buyer so that it would default in there and she would never have to go in there if you're not comfortable with that. On the product receipt, we took a look at the corrections and the cancellations. Question, way in the back. That is a great suggestion, and you are not the first person who has said that. He was asking if we could add some commenting around the corrections, because in other areas, you know, like the free text invoice, you do have some of that capability as well. It's not in there yet, even in R3, but it is something that we'll track. And in the front.
If you're purchasing for an item component tied to a sponsor, you can still do this. There's no implication. It'll go through and reverse the posting of that cost to that buyer.
That's a great question. He's asking if you are associated with a project if it does the reversal. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I won't even make an assumption, so I'll have to check up on that one for you. And right here?
So do we have a inbuilt approval workflow here?
Do you have voucher approval? Is it
No, approval workflow.
approval workflow?
Purchase order label.
Yes, there is purchase order approvals as well. All right, so I will continue on with the next area. And we will talk about vendor invoicing. So we are going to assume now that the buyer or the vendor has indeed shipped us both shipments of the goods. And now I've received my invoice. And there are a few changes that I'll need to deal with. I've highlighted those up on the screen. My cost has changed, the price that they're charging me. Instead of $20.90, it's going to be $20.99, so a little bit of an increase. And also there's this line that I wasn't expecting. It's the required NCAA logo. Well, I called up Alicia. I'm playing the role of April now, and I called up Alicia. She confirmed, yes, they have a mandatory stitching on the arm that has to go on all of these sweatshirts. She had agreed to the cost of that, so I'll go ahead and deal with that. We'll go back into the product. And I would like to go back into accounts payable, into the pending vendor invoices, and I'm going to create a new invoice. I'll go ahead and give it an invoice number. And I'll go ahead and also select the purchase order. And I should mention, just so that you're not confused, I had two purchase orders actually prepared out there. The first one I was working on with those corrections. I actually have the second one out there prepared where I had posted two product receipts for it without the corrections, if you're wondering what has happened and why I changed PO numbers on you. So this looks pretty good. This defaulted in my sweatshirts. I can see I have the $2,000 at the $20.90, but now I need to deal with that additional charge that was on my vendor invoice. Now if you're back on 2009, what you had to do was you had to go back to the purchase order and add that line to the purchase order in order to get it to default onto your invoice, and you could have done that as a line item, or perhaps you could have added it as a miscellaneous charge. But in 2012 now, we have the capability to have non-PO lines on our vendor invoices. So I can actually have a mixture of, like in this case, I have a PO line. I can add that NCAA stitching as a non-PO line. Those non-PO lines are great for things such as maybe a service. It could be an extra charge like this. It could be cleaning or supplies, any of your non-stocked types of items. So to add that NCAA, all I have to do is click Add Line, and I'm going to just add this as a procurement category, and we'll add one at $2,000, and that's as easy as it is. You can have a completely non-PO invoice in this form. So for those of you that are using the invoice journals to enter in things like a cleaning expense, for example, you could actually do that in this form. The caveat is that you would need to either set up a non-stocked item for it or have a procurement category set up for it. Now, one of the requests that we have received since we rolled this feature out is people would like to just have free text, just type in the line without having to set up any procurement categories. That is a suggestion that we are tracking. We are getting more suggestions around it. We have not included that yet, though, in Release 3 in all transparency, and we'll continue to monitor that. Setting up a procurement category really isn't too hard. There's 3 steps. You name it, you give it a description, and you put in an account. That's typically what I'm seeing people do if they want to move away from that invoice journal. So now at this point, I have my line added here. The distributions are very similar. In fact, they're exactly the same in concept, so I'll not dwell on those. You'll see the same form here. But what I did want to touch on is I told you that the distributions represented only one side of the transaction entry. It was only your debit side. Well, what about the credit side if you want to see your AP and everything that's going to post? You can see those now by looking at the subledger area. So you're getting a great preview before posting. Another way that you can prevent errors from happening before they hit the general ledger. So you'll see not only my expenses, but you'll also see my vendor balance and the accrual accounts that are being reversed out. So handy tool there. Oh, one other thing I want to mention too. Right in the middle of the form, we have this little link, and our customers are finding this really helpful. I don't know if everyone has discovered this link, but for those of you that have, people are telling me that they really like it. It's been a delighter for people. This link is to add more purchase orders onto a single invoice. So if your vendor typically invoices you for multiple purchase orders, you can use this. If you're on 2009, it would kind of be like the arrange functionality, but it's a great interface. People are fond of it, so let me just click this open for you. And what this displays here are all of the open purchase orders for this vendor in the currency that I have defined on my vendor invoice already. So you can see I have a few out there. And then the bulk of the form is showing you actually the line items that are contained on there. So let's just say I select this other purchase order. You can see there are 2 line items on that. Let's assume that the vendor had only invoiced me for one of those lines. I can pick and choose. So really handy, quick way to get additional lines on your vendor invoice if you want. And I'll just go ahead and I'll cancel out of here. I had touched on the subledger journal. The other thing that I should touch on is some posting changes. Out of the box, what you have is called synchronous posting. And for those of you on 2009, that's what you have. And synchronous simply means that when I post this invoice, it will update the vendor's balance and general ledger simultaneously. We have some new options in 2009. One of them is called asynchronous. Asynchronous essentially posts and updates the vendor balance, but it kind of puts it on hold in terms of posting to general ledger until resources are free on the server. So if you have any performance concerns, let's say you have many users in there and they're posting all day long, asynchronous might be a good option for you because it will just use up those resources when they're free instead of there being a lag. We also, of course, still have the batch posting available, so if you wanted to post during the evening, you could do that as well. But I just want to mention that to you as an option as we're going through some of this. Okay, the other thing, if you recall, I'll go back to that invoice just a second here. The price changed. So it went from that $20.90 to $20.99. So I need to deal with that. All right, let me just focus on this line. And it's $20.99. I just want you to draw your attention to this match variance checkbox. And watch that as I tab out. You'll see that that's now become a warning icon. There is something wrong, and it's because I have three-way matching enforced. So let me just go in and show you. I can drill into the matching details here. You have a filter here. You can show all of the lines from your invoice or just those with matching discrepancies. So we'll just drill down. It's these sweatshirts. And you can see the nice side-by-side comparison where you see the values from the purchase order that the invoice is expecting versus the invoice values. And indeed, my unit price changed. So of course, that threw off my costs as well. So let's drill into matching a little bit more. I'm going to just go ahead and I'll submit this. And let's go ahead and go back to the slides for just a minute here. Three-way matching. I'm going to start out just by defining this because we added three-way matching to AX 2009, and even as we did research years ago on that, there are many definitions of matching. The simplest definition is matching the purchase order unit price to the invoice unit price, and then also looking at that product receipt or that packing slip quantity compared to the invoice quantity. That's really what we have in 2009, and we have carried that forward in 2012, but let's just go through a quick example. Let's say that you have a company matching policy set to allow a 5% tolerance. So if prices are above that 5%, you want to be noted. Let's assume you have a PO with a quantity of 1,000 at a unit price of $1. Goods arrive, but when the invoice arrives, let's just say that now it's $1.10. So there's been a price discrepancy. Because of that matching tolerance of 5%, anything up to $1.05 would have been fine, but since $1.10 is above that 5% tolerance, that line will be flagged in Dynamics AX as having a discrepancy. And that's what you saw in my invoice. You saw that little icon light up in that case. You can set it to 0. That was the question from the audience. Can you set it to 0? And yes, if you want to always be notified, you certainly can. So let's take a look at this setup here. I'll close my vendor invoice, and I want to take you into the setup area. Accounts payable parameters is where you enable invoice matching. It's that top checkbox there, and I know that's hard for you to see in the back. It's simply enable invoice matching. So it's per company that you enable it. And when we rolled out our three-way matching solution in AX 2009, people were very happy with it. But of course, there were other scenarios and suggestions that we received, and we did listen to those. There were lots of interesting scenarios, for example, around service items. They said, I don't want to three-way match my service items. I would like to just two-way match those service items. Other example that I can think of off the top of my head was a customer was a service company, and they generally only wanted two-way matching, but whenever they brought on new vendors, they wanted a very strict three-way matching policy, like for the first 6 months that they were doing business with them, so that they could really scrutinize costs. Sometimes I've heard as well that if they have a very trusted, established vendor relationship, they don't want to use the three-way matching for those. Just let those go through. As such, we've implemented in AX 2012 a line matching policy concept, where you get to decide whether you are using three-way, two-way, or no matching, and you can override that at an item level, at a vendor level, and even at a vendor-item combination. So let's see how that works in action here. The line matching policy is located right in the middle of this form here, and let me drop this list. Here's where you have your options. So as a company, how do I want to handle my matching? In this case, I'm going to go through the example where as a company, I want everything subject to three-way matching, but for my service items, I only want to use two-way matching. So I'll go ahead and I'll set this to three-way matching. And we'll go take a look at where you can override those changes. It's under invoice matching. Matching policy. At the top of the form, simply showing us what we just set up. Our three-way matching is our company default. And as I mentioned, there's a little drop list here that has the override levels. I'll go ahead and select item. All of my items are going to default in, and it's showing me that they're all right now subject to my company policy, which is three-way matching. This is a service item, happens to be my first one. I'll set that one to two-way matching. So now in my company, anytime I use this service item, it will not default to three-way matching, it will default to two-way matching. Everything else will be three-way matching. Let's just take a look at the other options again. You can select vendor. If I do that, all of my vendors would default in. And here's where that example of maybe I don't want to have a certain vendor subject to matching, or that example where maybe I'm using two-way matching across the company. I could set a brand new vendor to use three-way in this area. And then you also have the ability to override at a per item vendor combination. So maybe when I order a certain item, let's say item A from vendor Annette, I want to use three-way, but when I order that same item A from, vendor Susie, I want to use a two-way or no matching. That's where this item vendor, so you can get real granular with your choices here. So again, just to review what I actually changed, I put my installation sales to two-way. Now I'm going to take you back into the parameters area just to show you another feature that we added in terms of the matching. As we gathered the feedback from 2009, some of the scenarios that came back were, three-way matching is great, but I really don't need that much matching going on at the line items. All I really want to know is, does my PO total match my invoice total? So we introduced a concept of invoice totals matching, and it's just as simple as it sounds. It compares that purchase order total to the invoice, and what we're looking at are subtotal, freight, miscellaneous charges, and the grand total. So you can enable that. I think of that kind of as a lighter weight matching because it's not doing the matching line by line, just looking at those totals. It's really perfect for those times if you have vendors where they simply invoice the whole purchase order and you're essentially doing a PO flip when you do the invoice. So we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at what that looks like. So you enable it. It's the second little tick box. It's called Match Invoice Totals. And you can give it a percentage. So let's just say I'll give it a 2%. And we'll go ahead and close. And we have time to take a look at this. I'm going to create a new purchase order. And let's add actually that service item so that you can see this in action here. On the line details, on the setup tab, the matching policy will default for you towards the bottom here. It has defaulted with two-way matching, again, because I created that override at that point. So it's not subject to three-way matching. We'll go ahead and we'll confirm this. Oh, and before I even confirm this, let's just go in and take a look at the totals. Right now, all I have is a subtotal of 150. I don't have any tax or miscellaneous charges. So now we'll go ahead and confirm that. And I'll just take you into the invoice form directly off the purchase order here. We'll change our default quantity to ordered. And I'll give it a number. And just for this demonstration so that we can get a variance, let's add some tax to it. I'll go ahead and add that to the line. We'll add some California tax. That should come out just fine there. And notice already I have my match variance as soon as I change that tax and tabbed off of it. So let's go and review that in the matching details form again. You can see right here is where we have the issue. And if I scoot that up just a little bit for you, you can see that it is the tax that doesn't match. I was expecting no tax on here, and I now have tax. So now that has thrown off not only my sales tax is a difference, but also the invoice amount. Instead of a 2%, I'm above my 2% tolerance, I'm actually 21% out of tolerance. So that matching shows up right there. I'll go ahead and close this out. And I'll actually just delete this one. Now, you may have noticed that as I was talking, there's a little toast that came up for me. I think I exited out of that. But in my scenario, I have my company set up such that whenever there is an invoice matching discrepancy, I want that invoice automatically routed to my manager. If there's no discrepancy, I want it to just post. We've introduced accounts payable workflow around our vendor invoice in AX 2012, and we're seeing a lot more people using that. So it's been really fun to see the different scenarios that people have come up with. So I'd like to show you, this is just a very, very simple scenario. So let's go in and see how I set that up. It's under accounts payable workflows. And I'll just go into edit mode to show you what I set up. Again, my scenario is that through the normal course of business, if there is a matching discrepancy, route it to my manager. If there's not, just automatically post it. And what you'll see here when this opens up is a canvas. If you're familiar at all with workflow from 2009, we do have workflow in 2009 around the journals, and it's the same framework that supports this. So let me just scoot this one up as well. When I started out, I just had a start and an end, and then I added this condition. What is my condition? It's simply, is there a matching error? If there is, then it needs to go over to my manager. If there's not a matching error, then try to automatically post. So let's go ahead and I'll just open up this condition to show it to you. I knew that the matching condition, that little red exclamation field, was called this vend invoice matching successful. So I set that value in here, but I want to just open this drop list for you here. Let's just add another condition, maybe that, and show you. You can add conditions on any field on the vendor invoice. You can see there's a lot of fields here. So you can be extremely creative with the way that you route your workflows and what conditions you're checking on. You know, another example that I had was someone had situations where if the net amount was, I don't remember what exactly their example was, but like if the net amount was over $100,000, it had to go to a certain manager. That you could set up in here. The matching one is a very popular one that people use in here. So that's as easy as it is to set up. There is a, let me open that up one more time. I just want to show you. You can test that condition and it will actually run through your invoices and let you know which ones. We also keep versions of the workflow. And in fact, when I set this one up, I didn't have it set up quite correctly my first time through. And so I just simply went back and edited it and saved that new version and was off and running. The approval right now, I am the administrator on this computer, so I've actually got the approval being routed to myself. That was that little toast. If you saw that notification that came up telling me that I have an invoice out there that I need to approve. So let's go and take a look at that. And what I'm going to take you to is a list page called Vendor Invoices Assigned to Me. And let's see, it is, let me just make sure. Yep, it's this first invoice. I can see below here that I have my advertising and my sweatshirts here. This yellow bar is a great indicator. Whenever you see that yellow bar, you know that workflow is enabled in this particular document. And now my actions have changed. Notice I don't have the ability to submit. It understands that I'm in the workflow and it needs an approval. So I could approve it or reject it. I could look at the history on this. And I'll just go ahead and I'll approve that. You can put in comments at that point if you'd like. All right, so that really is what I wanted to show you in terms of the vendor invoice. So we'll pause here and we can take some questions.
If you have quality orders and the purchase
If the question is, if you have quality orders that failed to post, would that show up as a quantity matcher?
They failed validation, correct?
Yes. If you do not, so are you saying that they are not posted in the system at all?
A quality order, if you set up a quality test,
Mm-hmm.
if it doesn't pass your quality test, it's failed the validation. And now you receive the invoice, you shouldn't be paying this because the quality has failed of the receipt.
Mm-hmm. I am not familiar with the quality orders. If the product receipt failed to post,
That's okay.
okay.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay, all right. I can tell you in terms of the quantity, we do match to product receipts. So if the quantity does not match, that's when we will fail the matching in terms of the three-way matching. I saw, yeah.
In regards to the tolerances for the matching, can you only set it at the company level? You've got some raw material vendors that are coming in, 5% of $1 million order is considerably more than 5% of some sweatshirts.
Yes, absolutely. The question is about the tolerances. Is that only at the company? The answer is no. You can override that all the way down to the item vendor combination. So again, maybe if item A, when you order from me, you want a 5% tolerance, whereas item A from this gentleman, you want a 2% tolerance. You can do that. Let me just show you where that's done. The tolerances are in this price tolerance form. And so what I'm talking about here is I could choose for, this item when I use this vendor, I want a 10% tolerance, whereas everything else, I have 0 tolerance, meaning I will get warned every time there's an error. All right, I'll take one more question right now. I have to decide. Okay, right, yep.
That was a good question. I think the way I interpreted that, we were looking for percent tolerance versus a dollar amount, flat dollar amount tolerance. Do we have flat dollar amount versus percentage only?
Percentage only at this level. We do have an overall line tolerance, a not to exceed amount, if you would like to think of it that way. So perhaps I think you had a good example where on $1 million item, you may be using a certain percentage not to exceed, say, $100,000. That's the way that one works. So it's a percentage in combination with an amount, but we don't have the option here to just say, I only want an amount versus a percentage. So
in the case of the total PO total matching, we can't say there was a variance of 5% or $5,000 per day.
right, you are correct. Yep, you are correct. All right. Let's see, I would like to transition into positive pay. And positive pay, as I mentioned, it's a new service that we have available in AX 2012, Release 2, Cumulative Update 6. Positive pay, again, in its simplest form, it's an electronic file that we send to the bank. And as vendors bring their checks in, the bank does a comparison of the file to what they brought in, and they'll check things like the amount, the date, the numbers. If they see any of those any deviations, they'll contact you. It's a fraud detection tool. So we're really excited to have rolled this in. In Dynamics AX, I'll walk you through the setup here. And there is a one-time setup in the system administration area. You have to set up your outbound ports. So let me just go in here. And this is not something that an April would be doing. It'd probably be your system administrator. I have one set up here for my bank, my U.S. operating bank. So basically you just name it, you give it the format, and then you have to point to your XSLT. XSLT, think of that, it's just the format that the bank is requiring from you. So maybe Wells Fargo has a certain format that they want these in. U.S. Bank may have a different format. Bank of America might have a different format. So this is sitting on my hard drive. It's just pointing to that format that I'm going to use. You also specify an outbound folder, and the only tip I would give you on this one is the person that runs the Positive Pay within Dynamics AX needs to have write access. They have to be able to write to that folder, so not just read access. And then your system administrator would click on the Create Ports option here to actually make that link to our AIF, or our Application Integration Framework. Again, that's just a one-time setup. In cash management, another one-time setup. You just have to specify a number sequence for your Positive Pay. I'll take you to the bank account here. I'd like to set this up for my operating bank. So I'll go ahead and we'll edit here. Positive Pay format is kind of in the middle of the form here. I'm going to just select the one that I showed you over in the system administration area. And then this date is a really important date, the Positive Pay start date. You don't want to leave this blank, because what it will do then is it will take every check that you've ever written for this bank account and include that in your first Positive Pay file. You probably don't want to do that, so make a mental note of that when you start using that you probably want to set that. With my data, I think I am back in 2012, so I'll go ahead and set that. And then let's run one of these. Positive Pay files can be run per bank account, or you can even run it at the company level. So I'll just go ahead and run this for my bank account. And I want to show you where you can run it across companies, because that's kind of a handy little feature here. Under Periodic Positive Pay file, you can select to run this across your companies. So let's go ahead and just select that. You'll see you can run it across all companies here. So now that's an option for you. Or just selected. And you can do it for all of your bank accounts from this location as well, or just selected. So same process that would run. And let's see if it has finished running yet. In the inquiries area, I can go under Positive Pay file summary. And good, it did finish running. You can see it included 13 checks. To get the details of that, you can drill into the details here, and it will show you this information. Once these have cleared the bank, perhaps they will give you a confirmation number. I think that's kind of a typical process that the bank will let you know. You can just type that number in. And you can also recall from this area. So for example, if you forget to set that date that I warned you about, and maybe you have thousands and thousands of checks in this file and you want to undo that, you can simply recall it, and then you could rerun for your appropriate dates. So that is Positive Pay.
You do this the first time, the second time you go and do it, what about that date? You put a new date in there?
Yes, every time that you run the Positive Pay file, you get the chance to run the date. You don't have to reset that start date, but you'll get the cutoff date for that information. So you do get the opportunity.
What version is this in?
Positive Pay Cumulative Update 6. I'm looking back to my colleagues and they're nodding yes. So anything greater than that. Question?
Are Positive Pay formats defined, or do we have to define our own?
Positive Pay formats, we don't have any out of the box that are shipped, and that's again I think because they are different per bank at this point. There isn't, unfortunately, there's not like a NACHA standard or any type of global standard across those. All right, so just a couple of top tips that I want to leave with you before we open it up for questions. Recall that on the PO and the product receipt, we saw some nice comparison, ability to compare versions. In the invoice area, remember that we have those non-PO lines available for you, so you no longer have to go back to the purchase order necessarily if you want to add those. In terms of that little link, that add another PO link that we have in there, a lot of people are finding that really handy. They're pleasantly surprised with that. In terms of the matching, two-way matching has been very popular. One thing I didn't mention, if you're using matching in 2009 and you upgrade to 2012, your matching policy will be set to three-way matching by default because that's what you had in 2009. You can change that though once you get to 2012. And then remember workflow, because you can get very creative with that. And I think that's a really great audit control that you could add. All right, I will open it up for questions, and I'll tell you thank you if you have to leave. Thank you so much, and make sure you fill out your evals. I'm going to start on this side.
Is there any functionality for supporting credit card payments?
Credit card payments, is there functionality for that? Christy, I'm looking back at you. I'm going to say just on the sales order. Anyone else over here on this side?
How much of it I can do for vendor portal?
How much can I do through vendor portal? You can do anything that's on the vendor invoice through the vendor portal. So that's the area that we've exposed it. So in terms of all the features you saw here, yep.
How about PO change management still not in vendor portal?
No, PO change management, that is correct. Right there?
What's the add-on for bringing in images?
The add-on for bringing in
How are you displaying images?
images you would have to attach as a document, so you'd have to link it to your invoice or your invoice line. Right now we don't have the ability to scan in vendor images, so that's something that we look at as well, is if we can add that. There are third-party apps. I think there were even 4 of them that are here at the expo. So, yes, way in the back.
Is there any option to encrypt deposit and pay file?
Option to encrypt. I'm going to have to look at Christy again. No? No. Christy, my colleague, is sitting in the back. She worked on Positive Pay. She is our payments guru. All right. Procurement on hours.
We get a lot of invoices for services where we're paying for hours of labor effectively. And as soon as it's labor hours, if you want to book them against something equivalent to a purchase order, that's been a challenge in the past.
Not that I'm aware. So I don't think we have a solution for you there. That's a good one, though. Way in the back?
Are you able to apply the matching policy on a specific vendor group or a service item?
Can you apply the matching policy on a group? No, you cannot. It has to be on an individual vendor. The tolerances that you set up can be applied to groups. So tolerances can, but matching policies can't. Saw a hand here, yes?
I typically have to start with the general ledger and then drill down.
Yes?
But my description in the general ledger just says product receipt or vendor invoice. Is there any way to change the default description to PO number 564 or something that's more descriptive than just product receipt?
That's a good question. Default descriptions?
You know what? I've typically gotten them out of the demo company. There's a setup for them in the demo company. You can just export, import, or key it in. And you should do that for everything because they're trying to rec out anything in the system. It's super hard unless you've got the description set up.
We've got it set up for everything except for the POs, so anything can be that one out.
So where do you
Okay.
I think it's under org admin setup.
Is it under org administration? Yeah. One more.
When you updated the line item on the invoice, the cost, did that go back and update the item inventory cost?
Yes, if you make an update on the cost on the invoice, it does impact the cost on the item.
And then that line item that you added, the $2,000, is that associated with that item as well as inventory cost?
No, it is completely a non-PO invoice line that's not stocked, and I used a procurement category. So in that case, no, it did not. So it didn't impact anything else on that invoice. All right, one.
On the positive pay.
Yes.
So you're running your checks, you're doing your payment journal, and then you're going over to cash bank management and you're running
The checks have to be posted, yes. Great question. How are we doing? Okay. That was a good clarification. If you didn't hear that, they have to be in the check file, not necessarily posted, but printed.
Right, I mean, from a control standpoint, like you, to me, if you want it to be posted before you start sending stuff to the bank.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Otherwise, I am right at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, I guess it is now, time zone difference from Fargo. And in the back. Positive pay across companies. Christy, it generates one.
As long as the XSLT is the same across those companies, it will create one file for them to just buy them. Different sections of the file for each company. One file, different sections of each company.
Yeah.
We basically keyed off the XSLT, so your XSLT is the same XSLT as bank A in one company and bank X in another company. We assume they're the same banks because you're using the same XSLT. So you have to create a unique AIF, and that shows you created the AIF in there. So create a separate AIF for each bank. We can show you that.
Yep, I can just show you right here. It's in this outbound port. So if you had, in this case, I have 2 XSLTs, 2 different bank accounts. But if you're generating, if I'm understanding correctly, Christy, across companies, it's one file per XSLT.
Yeah, if they're,
Yep.
the bank accounts are using the same XSLT, we're assuming it's the same bank.
Okay, thank you again, everyone. I'll be up here for questions.